Hello, thank you very much, Kenji. And yes, it's been a long haul. I actually started, as you probably see from the image, rather longer than 10 years ago. And actually, I'm a speech therapist, so hopefully you can hear me quite clearly. I'll try and enunciate with a southern accent, although actually I was brought up in Scotland and my daughter still lives up near you, and I was really upset when Kenji said this wasn't going to be face-to-face. I was very much looking forward to traveling north. Anyway, open source, free technologies available everywhere. Well, so they say, and in particular, we're trying to look at some that will be suitable for study skills. Now, I know that you've had a discussion with Craig Mill and probably Kenji over the time about free and open source software, but also possibly about open educational resources. And so I'm hoping if you don't know anything about them or if you have any questions, you will put them into the chat. And I will try and answer the questions. And as Kenji's just put something in that says we'll make it face-to-face next time, I'm going to hold him to that one. Anyway, my real drive behind looking at open source and free technologies, and in particular also open education resources, is not just the fact that obviously in England we now have a very different set of rules possibly for the Disabled Students Allowance coming into being, but I think that all of our universities and colleges are not being quite so free and easy in the way that they use technologies or offer technologies to their students. And we in particular find that many of the technology companies themselves are beginning to use subscription rates and other ways of getting them that make students think twice about purchasing technologies for themselves. So that was one driver. The other driver was the fact that we have this law about providing information in ways that everyone can reach it in an accessible format. And I know you will have heard about that before in previous meetings. But I think one of the real issues that we need to be careful of is understanding the difference between the different licensing, the different way we share stuff, either on the internet, online, through portable apps, and through our social use of social media. We are sharing far more, thank goodness, but we're also doing it in a way that sometimes contravenes some of the standards, guidelines come through from the Creative Commons group or the open source groups. So Creative Commons is about having free content, but there are several different licenses, and the same is true with open source. One is for software, open source, and the other one is for resources. The problem we have, in many ways, is that this gets muddled up with freemium, premium, and subscription, which tend to be commercial options, but not necessarily. And when I say commercial, I mean those options that have come from companies, well-known companies, that are now offering a range. And then the other side of it is that when we look at the social media, it's about sharing, but sharing securely. And I think a lot of our students are quite unsure about how they can do that as well. Creative Commons. Let's just have 2 seconds looking at this, because even Kenji asked me, well, you haven't included open on an original diagram I had. We have open educational resources now that we can share. Now, many lecturers don't do this. They tend to look at their own academic resources and present each time using those rather than perhaps reusing other resources. But those that do reuse other resources are not necessarily aware of the property rights, and we ourselves, when we put things up onto SlideShare or onto YouTube, may not be aware that in particular, if we use third-party resources, we are liable and the buck stops with us. We, the presenter, we, the lecturer, we, the tutor, we, the guide to those students who are also sharing their projects online. And it's important that we talk to them and ourselves about the different licenses. So very quickly, those top 3 that I've outlined in red, which is Open, CCO, or the CC BY, or the CC BY SA, have 3 different meanings. So the top one is very much about open, and we don't necessarily have to attribute that particular image to anybody. So something like Pixabay has lots of images, and it says no attribution necessary. CC BY, we do need to attribute, but we can share it with anyone. So even a commercial company can make use of it. And this is what we've done with our, what I call Tawasul symbols. They are an Arabic symbol dictionary collection that we've made so that anybody can use those symbols with someone who needs literacy support, who may have a wish to have some symbols that are related to the Muslim religion, or symbols that represent the way they dress, which aren't available in the normal symbol sets. And the Tawasul symbols are CC BY. But we worked with Arasac, who have some Spanish symbols for those who don't communicate particularly well or need support for symbols, and they made their license CC BY SA. Now this means that a commercial company can't use their symbols in a device, and we can't necessarily unless we ask permission, and they would need to give us permissions for the particular use that we may want to put it to. One thing you should probably know is that you can't go backwards. So if you have licenses below the red box or the CC BY SA, you really must follow that license. You can't go, and you must share it alike. That's what the SA stands for. Okay, but if you have a CC BY one, then you can use it in any way, but we would like some attributions to be put in there. So that is what is to do with all the resources that you may be using in your colleges. But when it comes to software and when you're working with coders, there's some very similar licenses. And so you would see that on some of the resources that you might be using if they included software. So YouTube, for instance, or audio recordings and things might have both licenses. Whereas you wouldn't see it if you were using it in an open educational resource that was just a text one. That would merely have the Creative Commons license. And Kenji asked me about, well, who are you using these rich resources with? Well, rich because I wanted them to be combined. I see a text by itself is not a particularly rich resource, although that means rich in that there's a lot of text. It may not be accessible. So, for instance, the example I've shown in the image is like a PDF that is locked down, and it was for a survey, which means I would need to have to offer another type of resource if I wanted to use it with a screen reader. Or I would need to use it with style sheets and headings, and I'm sure you've gone through all that, so I'm not going to repeat that. The most important thing, though, is if I add images, and when staff at the University of Southampton release education materials under open license, does the university offer any guidance? Yes. The answer is we are extremely lucky. We have a department that deals with this. We have some very, very interesting legal beagles sitting there. So when we did the LexDis project, which is about student strategies for the use of technology, and I wanted to include it in a MOOC, she immediately turned around to me and said, you need to make that CC BY 4. You mustn't put the copyright on Southampton because it's going to go into a MOOC that is being run by FutureLearn, and FutureLearn run all their MOOCs on CC BY 4. In other words, open, so that you can go back and get that content anytime from a FutureLearn course once you've registered. You may not get the comments, but you'll be able to get them. And thank you, Kenji, for putting the LexDis project up. So the images on that LexDis project, we could be in trouble. I have to say, we will have to go back. Now, the only reason I'm concerned about that is that we have done screen grabs, or students have done screen grabs. Now, on the whole, we've linked those screen grabs to a third party. So as long as they're linked, you have attributed them to that third party. And this is very important in when you're using images, that you attribute those images to someone, or if they request that you contact them, that you do that and you say so. Videos and audio-rich resources, we know we want to have transcripts, and we know that we would like to have captioning on the videos, and YouTube have really enabled that to happen. Once again, you need to be saying whether you're happy that that transcript is a free resource. Now, YouTube has its own licensing, and you have to be careful to check that you've got it correct, because the other side of it is that company, it's based in America, and under American laws, they will be slightly different to ours. And in fact, most of our social media is owned by them, or by the social media folks sitting in the United States, which is something for us all to be thinking about. So audio, yes, again, we would like multiple formats with a transcript and possibly some audio descriptions too to help those who might be reading something but not realize the setting. If we are supporting multiple formats, then we're very lucky. We have got several free checkers now. Microsoft in particular, version 10, have gone for an accessibility checker for their major word processing, PowerPoint, Excel type documents. And that will show you where you're not making them accessible. Same for the ebook. EPUB 3 has a format that will check. Again, W3C, really complex checks, but the automatic checkers like Wave and WebAIM, which are free, will do a very good, quick job. Obviously, you have to manually check everything as well. And there is an accessible checker. These are all free, the ones I'm mentioning. And then Synote, made at the University of Southampton by Professor Mike Wald, that allows the audio from any Panopto video, from any PowerPoint that's been audio recorded, to have a transcript, and also for the students to annotate it. And that's the really important thing, that your students can collaborate on that particular lecture at the time it's streamed. Moving on to open source software in its purity, in other words, just taking an application that someone has developed, whether it's a computer science student developed something like a T-bar, or whether it's one of the members of staff, or one of the things we've always found is the complexity of those licenses is a nightmare. The quality of the code should be superb, yes, because many large organizations use open source software such as Apache, Linux, all these different organizations have large amounts of code, but, and there is a but, because very often what happens is someone else takes that code, they fork it, and you don't necessarily know whether that code is going to be perfect. The sad thing about it is the maintenance side of things. You take a T-bar as an example, a toolbar that can give people the preference for color highlighting, text-to-speech on one of their web pages if they add it. Who's going to maintain it once the project has no longer received any funding for a year or so? And this is the difficulty with open source software. And on an analysis that I did, I found that many projects lasted for about 3 years and then started to wobble. And the ones that I'm mentioning in the next few slides are all still there. But there is a worry there. And the other side is who does the training? And so what we really have to do is to be very careful when we offer open source software as an option. It's absolutely super in that it does tend to be free. And certainly JISC in their blog about guiding how your institution use open software talked about 78% of companies making use of it. The tools are wide-ranging. Open source tools, open source resources, both are very wide-ranging. But sticking to the tools, I think you need to think about the strategy. In other words, the way you're going to use it and what they're going to use it for. And the setting within which your tools are going to be used, because those are 3 really important aspects. You also need to think about the expertise that you're bringing with that tool, the training and the management. You've got to think about the environment, not just the setting within the lecture theatre, within the student's assignment, within their projects. You're also thinking of the general environment around them. What's everybody else using? How are they going to cope when something goes wrong? And of course, your skill includes their abilities. And I'm talking about abilities, not abilities, because actually you need to be able to use it. And I'm quite keen on that idea that we don't try and put tools into disability silos and say, well, because they're blind, they need this, or because someone has a hearing impairment, they'll need X, Y, and Z. We need to be very careful about doing that. So moving very swiftly onto the idea of how we're going to categorize the tools. I have categorized them into functions. What I've done is I've talked about an open source tool that's still available. I've tried to give you a little bit of a chat about what it is, but I won't be talking about all of these tools. I've split portable into phone and portable for very good reason, that most portable technologies used to come on CDs. They now come on USB sticks or they're just online and downloadable. When we talk about phone, I do mean smartphone, and that I have to say I have not looked at a lot of the Windows built-in ones or the Windows extra apps, but I have put Android and iPhone up. Looking at free, that tends to be a commercial product like Natural Reader there, or it's a freemium so that you can get a trial with it. But also the commercial ones, what I've tried to say there is these companies very often give you something free, but also have a gold standard. So for instance, TextHelp will offer you a very large program that will have free elements to it, so Google App, Browser Labs. So looking at the TextHelp, you can see I've included AD bar, and I've included the main companies produce text-to-speech. Spell checking has really changed in the last 5 to 10 years because most apps now have spell checkers. We don't need additional spell checkers, but a particularly good one is the Aribi Verity Spell that came out of Sweden from a speech therapist there who looked at over 1,000 commonly made mistakes in English, Swedish, and Danish. And it had very good results when we checked it against other spell checkers, and it works with most other programs. A-Spell is the basis of many of the spell checkers that we now use. I mean, this is a side that's quite interesting, that when you look at the open source technology, very often you find that's what's behind all these additional technologies. And the same can be said true of mind mapping, graphical mapping, so that FreeMind developed into something like XMind. And when you look at the commercial ones, you will see that there's great similarities. The only differences are very often they will have a blob as opposed to a hierarchical one, or a mouse-driven one as opposed to a keyboard-driven one. And that is the crucial thing about the commercial products, that you need to be checking what are the differences between them all, because there are differences, and they do suit different learners' preferences. So some learners, for instance, may wish to have text-to-speech highlighting of individual words, and others prefer the background to be highlighted as well as the word, sort of a yellow background with blue on top, and others prefer just to have the white background with red text or yellow text or whatever. And you need to be able to know what it is that they offer. The same is true of mind mapping. When you go online, I have to say most of them don't work particularly well with text-to-speech online. MindMeister you can type in and get the text-to-speech, but very often they don't work particularly well. No reason why Simple Mind Plus is in white. That was my mistake. It's just to say that most of the portable phone apps come out as lists very often and are particularly difficult to use as a graphic or diagram when they're on a small 6x4 or whatever it is screen. So of course, some mobile phones are much bigger now, or their screens are. Kenji's asked, with so many to choose, how do you determine which is the best assistive technology? Do I have a checklist? Yes, very often I do. Do I know what criteria? You'll be very interested. We did a complete chart of the different technologies, and I looked at the boxes of all of them. Every single one of them had a tick if I'd just looked at the box. Yes, it gave me notes. Yes, I could use audio with it. Yes, I could use images. Yes, I could import a website if I was talking about a mind map. I could do all these things, but when I looked at the tech, I found that one of them looked like an Apple. Inspiration, for instance, had that Apple look, and some of the students liked that. Others didn't. They preferred Inspiration, but it had sharper buttons on the top. Some of them liked Spark Space Learner because that allowed us to have an image drawn straight away, and you worked from the image rather than working from the text. That sort of aspect, very little things that we checked off. So it is the look and the feel, and it is the ease of use as well. It's not just the accessibility. Maybe we need to publicize that a little bit more and find a checklist. Going on to reminders, nightmares, because you can have your to-do list, your portable stickies. You can have all these already built into most operating systems now, and in particular on your iPhones and your Androids. You don't need necessarily to have extras. But the most important thing is that something like AnyDo will work with Siri and TalkBack, and that's the sort of thing I keep checking. Will it work with the built-in accessibility options? Very important. There aren't many online ones that I would advise about because I think it's such a personal thing, this reminder one. Speech recognition, don't go there unless you feel really sure of yourself in terms of open source. Most of them were built around Carnegie Mellon University's Sphinx, but actually, after all these years, I still stick preferably with Dragon, naturally speaking. SpeakQ is very easy. It's based on the Windows technology, and I think the mobile apps are stunning. With my accent, I'm very spoilt. I can speak into Siri and talk back and get a reply immediately. But I know with some accents, it can be quite difficult. I find Google Voice recognition very good when I'm using it as a browser. But I am practicing to try and enunciate the ends of my words very clearly when I am using it. And I think that is one of the secrets. As far as scanning is concerned, we have gone more and more into the use of our mobile phones for the camera, and then using an app to be able to, like Open Lens, Office Lens, sorry, to be able to feed the text. It very much depends on the quality of the image. And I think the same is true when you are scanning with any of the portable scanners now. The light versions, Abbey Fine Reader, they're amazingly good, but you need to be careful about the quality still. Census acts as a system, and I know it's supported, many universities are now using it, and it supports the email-free OCR for limited amounts, works particularly well, and I know Kent University have been using it recently. So I'd go with the right-hand side of this slide rather than the left-hand side, because that's the side that works. I don't think I'm going to talk about dictionaries. I think we know that many of them are all online and very easy to get at, and the same is true of calculators. There are very few talking calculators left. The Premier talking software is the only one I could find, and that's fairly old. So I depend on my mobile phone, and it talks quite happily. And in note-taking, very much, if you're a Microsoft user, OneNote, both online and offline and portable, and Evernote the same. Very useful because you can capture images and videos and everything and tag them. In terms of the left-hand side, I'd be worried about ID Rover. It's quite difficult to use, but it is very much a researcher's PhD level type of note-taking device and quite useful from that point of view. Finally, references. I think reference has gone, is now just EndNote that you've got from that company, and it's very complex. We do talk about using MS Word for references if it's basic writing, but otherwise I think you are going to be using Mendeley or Zotero for Firefox. Mendeley at the moment seems to be winning out with its categories and its groupings. You can have group collaboration on papers and things. Site You Like is also very useful if there are particular subjects that you're very interested in. So finally, I'd just like to say one of the concerns I have is I was chatting to a group of librarians, and they admitted that they very rarely use social media with their students. They very rarely even texted or had obviously any phone contact with them. I do think that from our projects, we have learned a huge lesson. We put up a web page, we put up a blog, and we had email. And we received very little feedback on our Tower Soul symbols. We put up a Facebook group, and we've had amazing feedback. Over 50 countries now. The feedback has been phenomenal. I think we need to move with the times, and certainly all the PhD students that I work with, we work through Skype. Our PhD group, our postgraduate group, has Facebook, and we obviously use Twitter for getting information.